Hey guys, tonight we're diving head first, or perhaps nose first, into the gloriously underwhelming, universally shared misery of the common cold. Imagine, if you will, the damp chill of a prehistoric cave. You're huddled by a sputtering fire, trying to shape a flint, and then it starts. That tiny, unwelcome tickle in the back of your throat. Fast forward a few millennia, and not much has changed, has it? Except now you have slightly better tissues. Let's be honest, with some of the historical cures we'll be looking at, you probably wouldn't survive this journey back then with your sanity, or possibly your stomach, intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. That tickle you're feeling, there in that drafty cave, or perhaps in a mud brick hut nestled by a sprawling, ancient river, it's a sensation that has echoed down through countless generations. It's the great equalizer, this sniffle, this cough, this sudden weariness that drapes over you like a heavy, damp cloak. You feel it settle in your chest, a slight pressure, a foreboding that the next few days, or even a week, might be spent feeling just off. You wouldn't have called it a common cold, of course. The name itself is a relatively modern convenience, a label for an experience so ubiquitous it hardly needed a grand title. Perhaps you simply called it the sickness, or the running nose, or maybe, in a moment of profound irritation, something far more colourful that's been lost to the winds of time. Consider for a moment the sheer unadulterated annoyance of it all. There you are, trying to hunt, or gather, or perhaps lay the very first wobbly foundations of what might one day be called civilization, and your head is pounding, your nose is streaming, and every swallow feels like you're ingesting coarse sand. There's no medicine cabinet to raid, no brightly coloured pills, no soothing syrup promising instant relief. There's just you, the elements, and this persistent, unwelcome guest. It's a testament to human resilience, really, that anything got done at all with this constant, low-level biological warfare being waged against our sinuses. This relentless companion has been with us for so long, in fact, that it's almost part of the human condition. The common cold, as we now understand it, is caused by a bewildering array of over 200 different viruses, with rhinoviruses being the most frequent offenders. This viral diversity is precisely why it's been such a slippery foe, always mutating, always finding new ways to make us feel just a little bit wretched. And it's why, even now, with all our scientific prowess, a definitive cure remains tantalizingly out of reach. We can manage symptoms, shorten duration perhaps, but eradicate it entirely? The viruses just give a collective microscopic chuckle and carry on. Imagine trying to explain this to your ancient self, an invisible invader, a tiny life form, too small to see, that sneaks into your body and causes such disproportionate misery. You'd likely be met with a blank stare, or perhaps a suspicion that you'd spent a little too much time inhaling smoke from the damp firewood. For many early cultures, illness wasn't a matter of germs, but of imbalance. Perhaps the gods were displeased, or a mischievous spirit had taken up residence in your nasal passages. Some early beliefs even held that a particularly noxious smell, a miasma, could carry sickness into the body, which, when you think about some ancient sanitation standards, isn't entirely illogical, even if the mechanism was misunderstood. The idea that foul air could make you unwell was a surprisingly persistent one. It remains a subject of debate how clearly early societies differentiated between a mild cold, the kind that just makes you want to curl up and be left alone, and the onset of more serious respiratory illnesses like influenza or pneumonia, given the symptomatic overlap. That initial tickle, that first sneeze, was it just a passing nuisance, or the harbinger of something far more grave? Without diagnostic tools, without even a rudimentary understanding of virology, every cough could have been a source of quiet, gnawing anxiety. The line between a simple running nose, or catarrh as it was often termed, referring to the flowing down of mucus, and a life-threatening lung infection would have been terrifyingly blurred. You can almost feel that ancient frustration, the desire to do something, anything to make it stop. The constant drip, drip, drip from your nose, the raw feeling in your throat, the way your head feels like it's been stuffed with damp wool. You'd observe the world around you, searching for clues, for patterns. Did eating a certain plant make it worse? Did sleeping in a particular spot invite the ailment? Did angering a neighbor somehow result in this congested retribution? The world was a place of powerful, unseen forces, and illness was often seen as a manifestation of their will or a disruption of a delicate natural order. And it wasn't just a personal inconvenience. In a small, tight-knit community, one person's cold could quickly become everyone's cold. The concept of contagion might have been hazy, understood more through observation. Old man Tiberius started coughing, and now half the village is, rather than a scientific principle. You might notice that proximity to the afflicted often led to your own sniffles a few days later, leading to early, instinctual forms of social distancing, perhaps without even knowing why it sometimes helped. Or, conversely, a communal huddling for warmth or comfort might have just ensured everyone shared the viral bounty. It's a truly timeless dance, this spread of the common cold, played out in caves, in villages, in bustling ancient cities, and, yes, even in our modern, air-conditioned offices. The setting changes, the virus adapts, but the fundamental experience of feeling under the weather endures, a constant wheezing thread woven through the vast, sprawling tapestry of human history. And as you lie there, feeling thoroughly miserable, your mind would inevitably turn to one thing: relief. How could you make this stop? What could you possibly do to appease the spirits, or rebalance your internal humors, or simply soothe that infernal tickle? The quest for a remedy, however misguided, was about to begin. And so, your quest for relief begins, not in a brightly lit pharmacy, but perhaps in the dusty, incense-filled chambers of an Egyptian temple, or the bustling marketplace of ancient Athens, or even a Roman villa overlooking a sun-drenched vineyard. The air itself feels different here, doesn't it? In Egypt, you might smell the dry papyrus, the Nile's earthy dampness, and the complex blend of spices and resins used in both ritual and medicine. You've traded your damp cave for something more structured, but that pesky cold, that eternal sniffle, has followed you right into the heart of civilization. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest and most extensive medical documents from ancient Egypt, dating back to around 1550 BCE, actually lists remedies for coughs and what we'd recognize as cold symptoms. It's a fascinating glimpse, suggesting that even then, thousands of years ago, people were meticulously recording what they hoped would work. You might find yourself consulting a priest-physician, someone believed to have a direct line to Sekhmet, the lioness-headed goddess of healing, and plague, rather inconveniently. After a suitable offering, perhaps a small loaf of bread or a jug of beer, because even divine intervention sometimes requires a little earthly incentive, you describe your symptoms. The hacking cough, the streaming nose, the general malaise. The physician, wise and solemn, might nod and consult his scrolls. Remedies could involve a curious mixture of honey, a common ingredient prized for its soothing properties, and one that we still turn to today. But then things could get a little more adventurous. How about inhaling the steam from boiled dates and figs mixed with natron, that all-purpose salt used for everything from mummification to cleaning? Or perhaps a poultice of acacia leaves and human milk applied to your chest? Yes, you heard that right. The precise reasoning behind using human milk is still discussed by experts, with some suggesting it was believed to carry vital life force or specific protective qualities. You might also be prescribed a draught of something rather potent, perhaps, involving herbs like thyme or coriander, mixed with that ever-present honey, and maybe even a dash of castor oil, just to keep things moving, so to speak. The Egyptians were quite fond of purging as a method to expel illness from the body. The idea was that if you could just flush out whatever was causing the imbalance, health would be restored. So, alongside your sore throat, you might also be contending with a rather urgent need to find the nearest latrine. It's all part of the ancient healing experience, a full-body approach, whether you wanted it or not. Now, let's drift westwards, across the Mediterranean, to the sun-drenched shores of Greece. Here, the air is perhaps scented with wild oregano and the salty tang of the sea. You find yourself in a different intellectual climate, one where figures like Hippocrates are starting to shift the focus from purely supernatural causes of illness to more naturalistic explanations, though the gods certainly weren't entirely out of the picture. The Hippocratic school, which flourished around the 4th century BCE, famously emphasized observation and the body's own healing powers. Their approach to your cold might be a little less about divine appeasement and more about restoring balance to your 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A cold with its excess phlegm was a clear sign of humoral imbalance. So, what would a Greek physician recommend? Perhaps rest, a light diet, nothing too heavy to further burden your system. Chicken soup, or at least a nourishing broth, might well have been on the menu, a tradition that has remarkably endured. They were also keen on garlic, believing it had cleansing properties. You might be advised to chew on a clove or two, which would certainly do wonders for your social distancing, even if its viral efficacy was questionable. Honey and vinegar mixed together, a concoction known as oxymel, was a popular remedy for coughs, the sharpness of the vinegar thought to cut through the phlegm while the honey soothed. It's not entirely unpleasant, actually, a sort of ancient throat lozenge in liquid form. One rather quirky, lesser-known Greek practice for respiratory ailments involved inhaling the vapors from burning sulfur. While we now know sulfur dioxide isn't exactly a health tonic, the pungent fumes were believed to clear the airways and drive out the bad humors. You can imagine the coughing fit that might have induced, all in the name of wellness. Then, let's imagine you find yourself in the sprawling, powerful Roman Empire. Perhaps you're a legionary, shivering in a damp fort on the northern frontier, or a merchant in the bustling, noisy heart of Rome itself. Colds were just as common here, if not more so, with people living in close quarters. Roman medicine borrowed heavily from the Greeks, so the humoral theory was still very much in vogue. Pliny the Elder, a Roman author and naturalist from the 1st century CE, compiled a vast encyclopedia called Natural History, which includes a bewildering array of remedies for all sorts of ailments, colds included. He mentions things like sipping warm wine infused with pepper, or using the juice of radishes to clear the head. Cabbage was also surprisingly revered by some Romans, like Cato the Elder, who believed it could cure almost anything. Whether a cabbage compress on your chest would truly ease your cough is debatable, but the sheer faith in its properties is rather charming. One rather more robust Roman remedy for a persistent cough involved consuming snails. Not just any. Snails, mind you. They often had specific preparations, sometimes involving boiling them in their shells and drinking the resulting broth, or even eating them raw after they'd been fed certain herbs. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits came from the snails themselves, the herbs they consumed, or simply a placebo effect born of desperation and a belief in the like cures like principle, similia similibus curantur, where something slimy might be thought to help with excess mucus. You might also encounter the use of fenugreek, a plant whose seeds were believed to help expel phlegm. It could be taken as a tea or used in a poultice. And of course, there was always wine. Wine was a staple, often mixed with herbs and spices, and seen as a generally healthful drink. In moderation, of course, though the definition of moderation could be quite flexible. Throughout these ancient civilizations, from the Nile to the Tiber, you see a common thread, a deep reliance on natural ingredients, herbs, honey, animal products, and a framework, be it divine displeasure or humoral imbalance, to make sense of the unseen enemy that was the common cold. You'd feel that same fatigue, that same scratchy throat, and you'd reach for what knowledge, what tradition, what local wise woman or learned physician could offer. The remedies might seem strange, even alarming to us now, but they represented the cutting edge of their time, a testament to the enduring human desire to simply feel better, to breathe easier, even if it meant drinking snail broth or having your chest slathered with something questionable. You cough again, a deep, chesty sound, and wonder what concoction you'll be offered next. You feel the echoes of Rome fade, the sun-drenched villas and bustling forums receding into memory, as you find yourself stepping into a world that feels cooler, damper, and altogether more shadowed. The grand, centralized power has fractured, and in its place, new kingdoms rise, often built upon the old foundations, but with a distinctly different character. This is the medieval period, a vast stretch of time, and your persistent companion, that irritating common cold, has, of course, made the journey with you. The air in these new towns, with their narrow, unpaved streets often slick with mud and refuse, or in the stark stone corridors of a remote monastery, seems to carry a different weight. You might notice the pervasive smell of wood smoke, damp wool, and perhaps something else, a faint, unsettling sweetness of decay that people would have called miasma. This idea, that disease, including your relentless sniffles and cough, could be carried on these foul airs, these invisible, noxious clouds emanating from swamps or refuse heaps, was a powerful and enduring one. You huddle closer to a sputtering fire in a small, timber-framed house, the wind whistling through gaps in the wattle and daub walls. Your head aches, your chest is tight, and that cough just won't quit. Where do you turn for relief now? The sophisticated medical texts of the Greeks and Romans haven't entirely vanished, but they are often filtered, sometimes imperfectly, through new interpretations and translations, preserved primarily within the walls of monasteries by diligent, literate monks. Galen, the Roman physician whose work built extensively on Hippocrates, is still the ultimate authority. His complex system of humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, remains the bedrock of medical understanding. Your cold, with its abundance of phlegm, is a classic case of humoral imbalance, specifically an excess of cold and moist humours. The goal of any treatment, therefore, will be to counteract this by promoting warmth and dryness, and to expel the offending phlegm. So, you might seek out the local wise woman, her cottage filled with bunches of drying herbs, or perhaps, if you are fortunate or well-connected, the infirmera at the local monastery. Monasteries were not just centres of prayer and learning. They were often the only places providing consistent medical care, with their carefully tended physic gardens full of medicinal plants. Here, you might be offered a posset, a warm drink of milk curdled with wine or ale, often spiced with ginger or pepper, things believed to generate internal heat, or perhaps a concoction of hyssop, horehound or coltsfoot, herbs known for their expectorant qualities, designed to help you cough up that stubborn phlegm. These would be brewed into a tisane or mixed with honey, that ancient soother, to make them more palatable. If the herbs and warming drinks don't quite cut it, it might be time for something more direct. Enter the mustard plaster. This was a frontline treatment for chesty colds and coughs. Ground mustard seeds, mixed with flour and water to form a thick paste, would be spread onto a cloth and applied to your chest or back. You'd feel a prickling sensation, then a growing warmth, and soon a significant heat that could redden the skin. The theory was that this intense local heat would draw out the cold humours from deep within your lungs, or perhaps stimulate your body's own natural heat to fight off the ailment. It was, in its own way, a rather vigorous approach, and you certainly knew you were being treated. The relief, if it came, might be from the counter-irritation, distracting you from the deeper ache, or perhaps the warmth itself was genuinely soothing. Beyond the physical, however, illness in the medieval world was profoundly intertwined with the spiritual. Your cold might not just be a result of bad air or imbalanced humours. It could also be seen as a consequence of sin, a test from God, or even the malevolent influence of unseen demonic forces. Therefore, fervent prayer was an essential part of any healing process. You would pray for recovery, perhaps invoke specific saints known for their intercessory powers in matters of health. Saint Blaise, for instance, was often called upon for ailments of the throat. Attending Mass, making confession, and acts of penance were all considered crucial. Sometimes the application of holy water or touching a sacred relic was believed to bring about a cure. The line between medicine and faith was not just blurred, it was often entirely non-existent. The precise relationship between monastic medicine, which was often text-based and influenced by classical learning, and the more diverse, unwritten, traditions of folk healers in villages and towns, remains a complex area of study for historians, as both systems operated, sometimes in parallel, sometimes in synergy. You might also encounter some rather peculiar domestic remedies. Imagine being advised to wear a small bag of dried toad around your neck to ward off illness, or to inhale the smoke from burning old leather. One particularly eyebrow-raising, though perhaps less common, suggestion for a cough involved taking a lock of your hair, placing it into a hole bored into an oak tree, and then plugging the hole. The belief was that, as the tree absorbed the hair, it would also absorb your cough. It's a world where the symbolic and the sympathetic held great power. Another quirky tidbit involved the use of animal lungs, often from a fox, dried and powdered, then consumed to strengthen one's own lungs. The logic of like treats like was strong. The physicians of the time, those who were formally trained, relied heavily on uroscopy, the detailed examination of a patient's urine. The color, consistency, smell, and even taste, yes, taste, though by a brave assistant perhaps, of urine were meticulously analyzed against complex charts to diagnose the specific humoral imbalance. Your cloudy, perhaps thick urine would confirm the diagnosis of excess phlegm. Bloodletting, though perhaps less common for a simple cold than for fevers or more serious conditions, was still a potential treatment if the imbalance was thought to involve bad blood overwhelming the system. This could be done by opening a vein, venesection, or by applying leeches. The aim, again, was to restore balance, to remove the excess or corrupted humor that was making you feel so wretched. As you sit there, perhaps with a warming mustard plaster on your chest, sipping a herbal brew and murmuring a prayer, you are surrounded by a medical philosophy that had endured for centuries, a complex tapestry woven from ancient theories, Christian faith, and folk traditions. It's a system born of a desire to understand and to act, even when the true enemy, the virus, remained entirely invisible and unknown. The flickering candlelight casts long shadows, and you cough again, the sound echoing in the small smoky room, a timeless testament to humanity's ongoing battle with the eternal sniffle. The scent of wood smoke and damp wool from the medieval world begins to dissipate, replaced by something new, a subtle shift in the air. You can almost feel a burgeoning energy, a rediscovery of old knowledge mingling with the thrill of new horizons. You've drifted into the Renaissance, a period from roughly the 14th to the 17th century, where Europe is experiencing a great flowering of arts, science, and intellectual curiosity. While the Black Death had cast a long, grim shadow, its aftermath, paradoxically, contributed to social and economic changes that fueled this era of transformation. Your common cold, however, that faithful, unwelcome companion, has once again tagged along, utterly unimpressed by the masterpieces of Michelangelo or the revolutionary ideas of Copernicus. It's still just as determined to make your nose run and your throat scratch. You might find yourself in a bustling Italian city-state like Florence or Venice, or perhaps in the increasingly prosperous towns of Northern Europe. The printing press, a revolutionary invention from the mid-15th century, is beginning to make ancient texts, including those of Galen, Hippocrates, and other classical medical authorities, more widely available than ever before. This flood of rediscovered knowledge is exciting, but it also means that the foundational humoral theory, the one you remember from your medieval and ancient encounters with illness, is still very much the dominant medical paradigm. Your cold is still viewed as an excess of phlegm, a chilling imbalance in your body's delicate ecosystem. However, something new is stirring. The great voyages of exploration are opening up previously unknown parts of the world, and with these ships come not just gold and spices for the wealthy, but also a dazzling array of new plants, many with reputed medicinal properties. Imagine the excitement in an apothecary's shop as a new shipment arrives from the Americas or the Far East. Exotic barks, strange roots, fragrant leaves, each holding the promise of a potent new cure. For your persistent cough and stuffy head, you might be offered something made with guaiacum wood, also known as lignum vitae, or wood of life, imported from the Caribbean. It was initially hailed as a miracle cure for syphilis, but its perceived heating and drying properties soon saw it being applied to other ailments, including respiratory complaints. Or perhaps you'd encounter cinchona bark from South America, which, while later found to be effective against malaria due to its quinine content, was initially tried for all sorts of fevers and ailments, including those accompanying a bad cold. The precise effectiveness of these new botanicals against viral infections was, of course, minimal, but their novelty and the great distances they travelled lent them an air of potency. Herbal remedies remain central, of course. The great herbals of the period, beautifully illustrated books by botanists like Leonhard Fuchs or Hieronymus Bock, meticulously catalogued plants and their supposed medicinal uses. You might still be sipping horehound tea or a licorice root infusion for your cough, remedies that have a long and venerable history. But now, these familiar treatments might be augmented with newly fashionable ingredients. Sugar, once an expensive luxury, is becoming more accessible, and it's often used generously in medicinal syrups and lozenges, making the remedies more palatable, even if its health benefits were debatable. It's a subject of ongoing scholarly discussion how much the influx of these New World botanicals genuinely advanced medical treatment for common ailments versus how much they simply expanded the existing pharmacopoeia with substances whose true effects were poorly understood. The understanding of the cold itself remains charmingly murky. While the humoral theory provides a framework, the actual cause is still elusive. Miasmas, those noxious airs you encountered in the medieval period, are still widely blamed. Poor sanitation, overcrowding in growing urban centres, and the general miasma emanating from tanneries, slaughterhouses, or stagnant water were all seen as contributors to ill health, including your stubbornly streaming nose. There's a certain intuitive logic to it. Places that smelled bad were often places where people got sick, even if the link wasn't microscopic invaders, but something more generally unhygienic. One fringe belief, perhaps whispered in hushed tones, was that strong emotions could trigger a cold, a sudden fright, or a bout of melancholy might, it was thought, disrupt the humours sufficiently to manifest as physical illness. It's a reminder that the mind-body connection, though not understood scientifically, was certainly observed. You might find yourself consulting a university-trained physician who, despite the intellectual ferment of the Renaissance, would still, likely, diagnose your cold based on Galenic principles. He might prescribe phlebotomy, bloodletting, if you seemed particularly full-blooded, or if your phlegm was deemed excessively thick and stubborn, though perhaps with slightly more refined tools than in centuries past. Purging, too, remained a popular strategy to expel the offending humours. You might be given a fairly aggressive laxative or an emetic to induce vomiting, all in the name of cleansing your system. You can just imagine the sheer misery, battling, a hacking cough, a pounding headache, and the dramatic effects of a powerful purgative. It makes a simple cup of tea and a day in bed seem positively luxurious by comparison. One mainstream historical fact from this era is the continued importance of regimen, the idea that health was maintained not just by specific medicines, but by a carefully controlled lifestyle encompassing diet, exercise, sleep, and even the regulation of emotions. Your physician would likely advise you on what to eat, warm, dry foods to counteract the cold, moist phlegm, what to avoid, chilled, drinks damp air, and the importance of moderate activity. This holistic approach, while based on an incorrect understanding of disease, did at least emphasize aspects of self-care that have some modern resonance. Even with the intellectual advances, some folk beliefs and practices persisted, a testament to the enduring power of tradition. For instance, the idea of sympathetic magic was still around. You might encounter the belief that an object associated with your illness, say a cloth you'd coughed into, if buried or transferred to an animal, could take the illness with it. Remember that hair in the oak tree from the medieval period. Similar ideas lingered, adapting to new contexts. As you sneeze, a passerby might still offer a "God bless you," a phrase thought by some to have originated during times of plague, but which carried a general wish for divine protection against the ill effects of what was expelled in a sneeze. Perhaps the soul trying to escape, or evil spirits trying to enter. The Renaissance, for all its brilliance, hadn't yet illuminated the true nature of your cold. The microscope was invented during this period in the late 16th century, but its application to medicine and the discovery of microorganisms like viruses were still far in the future. So, you sniffle, you cough, you sip your herb-infused wine, perhaps now sweetened with a touch of New World sugar, and gaze out at a world that is simultaneously rediscovering its past and boldly exploring its future, all while grappling with the same ancient microscopic foe that has plagued humanity since time immemorial. The search for relief continues, fueled by a potent mix of ancient wisdom, new discoveries, and a charmingly persistent, if often misguided, optimism. The Renaissance air, with its hints of exotic spices and freshly printed pages, gradually gives way to the salty tang of sea spray and the scent of pine forests. You find yourself crossing the vast, formidable Atlantic, a journey fraught with peril, not least from the common cold itself, which could sweep through the crowded, damp confines of a ship with alarming speed. You've arrived in the nascent colonies of North America, perhaps in the rugged settlements of New England, the more temperate lands of Virginia, or the nascent, bustling port towns that would one day become great cities. Life here is hard, a constant struggle against the elements, and the familiar miseries of a cough, a sore throat, and a runny nose are unwelcome but frequent visitors, just as they were in the old world you've left behind. As a settler in this new land, you carry with you a precious cargo of traditions, beliefs, and importantly, remedies from Europe. The humoral theory, that steadfast companion, has made the voyage too. Your cold is still seen as an imbalance, likely an excess of phlegm brought on by the damp, chilly air of a New England winter, or the humid miasmas rising from a tidewater swamp. You'd turn to the familiar European herbs, if you were lucky, enough to have brought seeds or found a way to cultivate them in this new soil. Horehound, thyme, sage, chamomile. These would be mainstays in your kitchen garden, ready to be brewed into teas or infused in honey. Remember that mustard plaster that brought such fiery comfort to your chest in medieval times. It's still a go-to remedy, the sharp scent of mustard filling your small cabin as you try to sweat out the illness. But this is a new continent, teeming with unfamiliar flora, and you, or perhaps the local indigenous peoples you encounter, soon begin to discover the medicinal properties of native plants. This blending of Old World traditions with New World botanicals is a hallmark of colonial medicine. You might learn from a Native American healer about the soothing properties of slippery elm bark for a sore throat, or the use of willow bark, a natural source of salicin, the precursor to aspirin, for aches and fevers that often accompany a cold. Echinacea, wild cherry bark, ginseng, golden seal. These and many other plants would slowly find their way into the colonial pharmacopoeia. The process of discovering and adopting these new remedies was often one of trial and error, sometimes guided by local knowledge, other times by a desperate hope that this unfamiliar root or leaf might hold the key to relief. Historians still debate the extent and nature of this exchange of medical knowledge between colonists and indigenous populations, acknowledging that it was complex and varied greatly by region and relationship. Your colonial kitchen is your pharmacy. Molasses, a readily available sweetener from the Caribbean trade, often takes the place of more expensive sugar or honey in medicinal concoctions. A hot toddy, made with rum or whiskey, as these spirits became more widely produced and available, molasses, hot water, and perhaps a squeeze of lemon if you could get one, would be a common prescription for a cold, guaranteed to warm you from the inside out and perhaps help you forget your misery for a little while, even if it did little for the underlying virus. Onion syrup was another popular home remedy. Sliced onions layered with brown sugar or molasses, left to sit until a syrup formed, then taken by the spoonful for coughs. The pungency alone felt like it had to be doing something. If your cold was particularly stubborn, you might resort to remedies that seem rather robust by our standards. How about a nice tar water? This involved steeping pine tar in water and drinking the resulting infusion. Bishop George Berkeley, an Irish philosopher who spent time in Rhode Island in the 1720s, became a huge proponent of tar water, extolling its virtues for a vast range of ailments, including coughs and lung issues. He wrote extensively on it, and for a time, it became quite fashionable on both sides of the Atlantic. Its actual benefits are, shall we say, questionable, but the strong, resinous taste certainly made an impression. Another common, if slightly less appealing, kitchen cure involved simmering garlic in milk, then drinking the warm, fragrant, or perhaps to some, alarming brew. The belief in garlic's purifying and warming properties was deeply ingrained. Beyond these kitchen cures, you might also encounter figures like the local minister, who often doubled as a physician in smaller communities, drawing on his education, which would have included some medical knowledge, however outdated. Or perhaps there was a local woman known for her skill with herbs and midwifery. Formal medical training was scarce in the colonies, especially in the earlier periods. Many doctors were apprenticed, learning their trade through observation and practice rather than formal schooling in dedicated medical institutions, which were few and far between. One lesser-known practice involved snuffing, inhaling powdered substances, sometimes tobacco, sometimes specific herbs like horehound or bloodroot, directly into the nostrils to induce sneezing. The idea was that a good, hearty sneeze could expel the peccant humours, or whatever was causing the congestion. You can imagine this leading to quite a dramatic, if temporary, clearing of the nasal passages, followed by a lot of watering eyes. A mainstream historical fact for this period is the significant role of self-reliance in colonial healthcare. With doctors often unavailable or too expensive, families relied heavily on their own knowledge, passed down through generations or recorded in handwritten household medical books. These precious volumes would contain recipes for syrups, salves, poultices, and plasters for all manner of common complaints. You'd be responsible for tending to your family's sniffles and coughs, gathering herbs, preparing remedies, and nursing them through their illnesses. This self-sufficiency was a necessity, born of the harsh realities of colonial life. You cough, the sound absorbed by the rough-hewn wooden walls of your cabin. Outside, the vast, untamed wilderness stretches for miles. The remedies you use are a blend of the old and the new, a testament to human adaptability and the enduring quest for comfort. You might sweeten your herbal tea with maple syrup, a truly North American ingredient, or apply a poultice made from a plant your European ancestors never knew. The cold virus, however, remains stubbornly indifferent to geography or botanical novelty. It simply continues its work, making you feel tired, achy, and congested, a timeless reminder that some discomforts are universal, no matter how far you travel or how new your world may seem. The fire crackles, and you pull your woolen blanket tighter, hoping this particular colonial concoction will bring some measure of relief before the long, cold night is through. The rustic scent of pine tar and wood smoke from the colonial cabin gradually fades, replaced by the distinct aromas of coal smoke, damp wool, and a curious undercurrent of chemicals. You find yourself in the 19th century, the Victorian era, a time of immense industrial growth, scientific advancement, and, paradoxically, some truly extraordinary ideas about health and medicine. Cities are swelling. Factories are churning out goods at an unprecedented rate, and your old friend, the common cold, is thriving in the crowded, often unsanitary, urban environments. That familiar tickle in your throat, the stuffy head, the weary ache in your bones. They feel just as miserable amidst the clatter of horse-drawn omnibuses and the shadow of gas lamps as they did in a drafty colonial outpost. The humoral theory, which has been your constant companion through ancient Egypt, medieval monasteries, and Renaissance apothecaries, is finally, slowly, beginning to lose its iron grip on medical thought. The rise of germ theory, spearheaded by scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch in the latter half of the century, is starting to revolutionize the understanding of disease. The idea that tiny, invisible organisms, not imbalanced humors or noxious miasmas, are responsible for making you sick is gaining traction, though it will take time for this new knowledge to fully permeate medical practice and public consciousness. For much of the Victorian era, especially the earlier decades, older ideas still hold considerable sway, creating a fascinating, sometimes alarming transitional period in medicine. So, what happens when your cold strikes in, say, London or New York in the 1860s? You might still be advised to wrap up warm, drink hot liquids, and perhaps use a mustard plaster, just like your great-grandparents did. But you also have access to a bewildering and often unregulated array of new options. Patent medicines. This is the golden age of proprietary remedies, brightly packaged and aggressively advertised elixirs, pills, and syrups, promising miraculous cures for everything from coughs and colds to consumption, tuberculosis, and female complaints. These concoctions often had catchy names like Dr. Seth Arnold's Cough Killer, Ayer's Cherry Pectoral, or Hamlin's Wizard Oil. Their ingredients were frequently a secret, but many contained generous amounts of alcohol, opium, morphine, or even cannabis. A spoonful of cough syrup might indeed suppress your cough and make you feel a good deal more cheerful, largely due to the opiates or booze it contained, but it wasn't doing anything to address the underlying viral infection. This widespread use of potent narcotics in over-the-counter remedies is a stark reminder of how different the regulatory landscape was. If you sought professional medical advice, you might encounter a physician who subscribed to heroic medicine. This was a particularly aggressive school of thought, popular in the early to mid-19th century, which believed that illness was a result of overstimulation or imbalance in the body's systems, requiring forceful intervention to shock the body back to health. For your common cold, especially if it was accompanied by a fever or seemed particularly severe, this could mean bloodletting, still hanging on, aggressive purging with strong cathartics like calomel, mercurous chloride, which we now know is toxic, or blistering agents applied to the skin to create painful sores, believed to draw out the disease. You could emerge from such a vigorous treatment feeling considerably worse than when you went in, weakened by the loss of blood and fluids, and possibly suffering from mercury poisoning. It's no wonder some people preferred to take their chances with grandma's questionable gruel. Steam inhalations were also incredibly popular. You might be instructed to drape a towel over your head and breathe in the steam from a bowl of hot water, perhaps infused with camphor, eucalyptus, which was becoming more widely available, or benzoin. This felt soothing and seemed to help clear the nasal passages, a practice that still has its adherents today. However, sometimes these inhalations could be quite intense. There were dedicated, often ornate steam inhalers for sale, and some physicians even recommended inhaling the vapor of carbolic acid, a powerful disinfectant, in an attempt to kill the germs in your airways. While carbolic acid was indeed a potent antiseptic, inhaling its fumes was not without risk. Historians still discuss the balance between the genuine desire to alleviate suffering and the sometimes harmful zeal of these heroic measures, particularly before germ theory was fully accepted and understood. One particularly quirky, lesser-known Victorian trend for respiratory complaints was the water cure, or hydrotherapy. Popularized by figures like Vincent Priesnitz, this involved a wide range of treatments using water, both internally and externally. For a cold, you might be subjected to cold baths, wet sheet packs, where you were wrapped tightly in cold, damp sheets, or dushing of the nasal passages with cold water. The idea was to stimulate the body's vital force and promote healing. While a brisk cold bath might certainly wake you up, its efficacy against a rhinovirus is highly doubtful, and it sounds profoundly uncomfortable when you're already feeling under the weather. Dietary advice for a cold could be quite specific. You might be told to avoid cold foods and drinks, and to stick to light, nourishing fare like broths, gruels, and jellies. Beef tea, a thin broth made by simmering beef, was a staple for invalids. Lemons, increasingly available, were prized for their cooling and cleansing properties, and hot lemonade was a common recommendation. The Victorians were also great believers in the importance of fresh air, good air, as opposed to miasmatic bad air. Despite the often heavily polluted air of industrial cities, opening windows to ventilate rooms, even in winter, was considered important for recovery, a departure from earlier fears of drafts causing illness. A mainstream historical fact of this era is the burgeoning public health movement. As understanding of contagion grew, albeit slowly, there was an increasing focus on sanitation, clean water supplies, and improved living conditions, particularly in urban areas, to combat the spread of diseases far more serious than the common cold, like cholera and typhoid. While these measures weren't aimed directly at your sniffles, a healthier overall environment would, in theory, lead to a healthier populace, perhaps better able to withstand minor ailments. You sneeze and reach for a handkerchief, perhaps a delicate lace-edged one if you're a lady of means, or a more utilitarian square of cotton. The world outside your window is one of rapid change, of steam trains and telegraphs, of burgeoning scientific understanding clashing with entrenched traditions. Your cold feels ancient, yet the attempts to banish it are taking on new, sometimes alarming forms. You might be tempted by that brightly advertised bottle of Sure Cure cough syrup from the chemist's shop, or you might opt for a bracing inhalation of eucalyptus steam, all in the hope that this time, this remedy will be the one to finally send your unwelcome respiratory guest packing. The vapors swirl, the city hums, and you cough again. A small sound in a century of big changes. You cough again, that familiar, weary sound, and as you do, the atmosphere around you shifts, becoming, well, frankly, a little bizarre. The Victorian era, with its mix of scientific progress and questionable remedies, fades into a realm of truly eyebrow-raising cures, the kind that make you wonder just what people were thinking. Prepare yourself. You're about to enter the gentle parade of some of the most peculiar, downright strange, and often utterly illogical cold cures ever devised. This is the Weird Stuff Brigade, a collection of remedies so eccentric, so outlandish, that they're almost entertaining in their absurdity. Let's start with something seemingly innocuous. Wearing onions. Yes, you read that correctly. The belief that placing sliced onions in your socks overnight could draw out illness was surprisingly widespread. The precise reasoning varied. Some thought the onion absorbed toxins through the skin. Others believed its pungent vapors somehow purified the body. And some thought the onion was just a convenient smelly poultice that would encourage sweating. Whether it actually did anything for your cold is highly doubtful, but it certainly made for an interesting aroma wafting from your feet. You might also find people placing sliced onions around the house, believing they would absorb illness from the air. Think of them as pre-industrial air purifiers, albeit rather smelly ones. Now let's move on to something a little more organic. How about wearing a necklace of garlic cloves to ward off illness, or carrying a raw potato in your pocket for the same purpose? These practices are rooted in a belief in sympathetic magic, where the perceived properties of an object, in this case, the strong smell of garlic or the starchy substance of the potato, were thought to somehow repel or absorb the disease. It's a bit like having your own personal pungent force field against germs. You might also encounter people wearing asafoetida bags around their necks. Asafoetida is a resin with a notoriously strong sulfurous odor, and the belief was that its unpleasant smell would ward off disease. The logic apparently was that if you smelled bad enough, the viruses would simply give you a wide berth. It was certainly a potent form of social distancing. Then there are the transference cures. Remember that lock of hair in the oak tree from medieval times? Similar ideas persisted. You might be advised to tie a knot in a handkerchief for every sneeze you had, then bury the handkerchief, symbolically burying your cold with it. Or perhaps you'd transfer your cough to an animal. One particularly charming, if somewhat cruel practice involved breathing into a dog's mouth. transferring your illness to the unfortunate canine. One can only imagine what the dog thought of this treatment. Another practice involved placing a sick child's sock on a donkey's back, in the hopes that the donkey would take the illness. The precise reasons for these beliefs are still discussed by experts, but they seem to stem from a desire to physically separate oneself from the illness, to give it to someone or something else, even if that someone was an unwitting animal. Some cures involved rather specific rituals. For instance, you might be instructed to whisper your cough into a running stream, symbolically washing it away, or to write your symptoms on a piece of paper and burn it, releasing the illness into the air. These practices often had a strong element of faith or superstition, a belief that the act itself, rather than any specific ingredient or substance, would bring about a cure. The power of suggestion, the placebo effect, and the simple comfort of ritual might have played a significant role in their perceived efficacy. One especially peculiar remedy involved wearing red flannel shirts, underwear, or even strips of red flannel wrapped around the throat were believed to have curative properties, particularly for colds and sore throats. The origin of this belief is somewhat murky, but it may stem from the association of red with warmth and vitality. Red was also seen as a protective color in many cultures, warding off evil spirits or disease. Whether a red flannel shirt actually eased a sore throat is debatable, but it certainly made a fashion statement. Then there are the cures that simply defy logical explanation. Consider the practice of eating live spiders to cure a cough, or drinking urine, sometimes one's own, sometimes that of an animal, for various ailments, including colds. These practices, thankfully, were not widespread, but their existence is a testament to the sheer desperation people sometimes felt when faced with illness. The mainstream historical medical texts rarely, if ever, advocated for these practices. They were folk remedies, often passed down through families or within small communities, existing outside the realm of formal medical knowledge. The sheer variety and eccentricity of these cures highlight the limitations of medical understanding. Before the advent of modern science, without a clear understanding of the causes of illness, people relied on observation, tradition, superstition, and a healthy dose of hope to find relief. The logic behind many of these practices might seem baffling to us now, but they represent a genuine attempt to make sense of the unseen enemy and to exert some control over the unpredictable nature of disease. As you imagine yourself following one of these bizarre prescriptions, perhaps wearing onion-stuffed socks or whispering your cough to a babbling brook, you can't help but feel a certain sympathy for those who came before us, grappling with the same sniffles and sneezes, armed only with their ingenuity, their beliefs, and a whole lot of very weird stuff. Leaving the realm of truly bizarre brigades and their curious concoctions, you find yourself stepping into a more familiar, though perhaps equally perplexing, setting, the domestic hearth. Here, amidst the comforting smells of home, baking bread, simmering stews, and perhaps the lingering scent of last night's wood smoke, another kind of pharmacy exists. This is the realm of Grandma's questionable gruel, the domain of passed down wisdom, where family recipes for soothing drinks and pungent rubs have been handed from generation to generation, each with its own story and a hefty dose of maternal or paternal conviction. Your cold, that ever-present nuisance, is now subject to the well-meaning, if sometimes dubiously effective, ministrations of homespun medicine. Imagine a kindly grandmother, her brow furrowed with concern as you cough and sniffle. She bustles about the kitchen, her movements practiced and sure as she prepares her time-honored remedy. First up, the warming drinks. Hot toddies, as you encountered in colonial America, remained a firm favorite. The combination of alcohol, hot water, honey or sugar, and lemon believed to induce a healing sweat and soothe a raw throat. The specific spirit might vary: whiskey, rum, brandy, but the principle was the same: warmth, comfort, and perhaps a touch of mild intoxication to take the edge off your misery. Whether it genuinely shortened your cold is debatable, but it certainly made enduring it a little more pleasant for many. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of alcoholic remedies were primarily due to their sedative effects, their ability to induce sweating, or simply the comforting ritual of their preparation and consumption. Then there's the classic chicken soup, Jewish penicillin, as it's affectionately known. Though versions of nourishing meat or vegetable broths for the sick exist in countless cultures, there's something undeniably comforting about a steaming bowl of soup when you're feeling unwell. Modern science has even found some evidence that chicken soup may have mild anti-inflammatory properties and can help clear nasal passages. But for generations, its power was simply accepted, a restorative elixir passed down through family lore. Grandma might have her own secret ingredient, a particular herb, a specific way of simmering the bones that made her soup uniquely potent in her eyes. Beyond the soothing and the soupy, you might encounter more robust domestic treatments. Remember that mustard plaster? It's still going strong in the domestic arsenal, a reliable if fiery friend for chesty coughs. But Grandma might also have her own recipe for a chest rub. These could be made with a base of goose grease, lard, or petroleum jelly as it became available, mixed with ingredients like camphor, eucalyptus oil, menthol, or even turpentine. The idea was that the warming, penetrating vapors would loosen congestion and ease breathing. You'd be slathered with this pungent concoction, often wrapped in flannel, perhaps red flannel for good measure, as you recall from the parade of peculiar cures, and sent to bed. The aroma alone was enough to clear a room, and you certainly felt like something was happening. Gruels and porridges were also standard sickroom fare. These were easily digestible, nourishing, and could be customized with various additions. Oatmeal porridge, rice gruel, or arrowroot gruel might be sweetened with honey or molasses, flavored with cinnamon or nutmeg, and sometimes fortified with a splash of milk or cream. The blandness was often intentional, easy on a potentially upset stomach, and providing simple calories when appetite was poor. Sometimes, these gruels incorporated medicinal herbs, like slippery elm to soothe a sore throat, or flaxseed to act as a gentle laxative if constipation was also an issue, as it sometimes could be when one was unwell and less active. One rather quirky, lesser-known domestic practice involved the sock onion in a slightly different form. Instead of wearing the onion in your own sock, a cut onion might be placed on a sick person's bedside table, again with the idea that it would absorb impurities or germs from the air in the room. The house might smell like a salad, but it was all in the name of health. Another persistent belief was in the power of certain foods to feed a cold or starve a fever, though the advice on which to do went often varied and was a source of much folk wisdom and debate. Then there were the gargles. Saltwater gargles, a practice still recommended today for sore throats, were common, but you might also encounter gargles made with sage tea, raspberry leaf tea, or even a diluted solution of borax. The aim was to cleanse the throat, reduce inflammation, and soothe irritation. Some of these ingredients had mild antiseptic or astringent properties, so they might have offered some temporary relief. Remember the oxymel from ancient Greece, that mix of honey and vinegar? Variations of this, sometimes with added herbs, continued to be made in home kitchens as a cough, syrup, or throat soother. The sharpness of the vinegar, combined with the sweetness of the honey, was a classic combination. A mainstream historical fact of domestic medicine is its incredible resilience and adaptability. While formal medical practices evolved, often dramatically, these home-based traditions often continued alongside them, passed down orally or in handwritten family receipt books. They represented a first line of defense, especially for families who lived far from doctors or couldn't afford professional care. This kitchen physic was practical, accessible, and deeply embedded in the culture of daily life. You sip the warm, sweet, and slightly spicy drink your grandmother has prepared. It might be a simple honey lemon concoction, or something more elaborate involving a secret blend of herbs. It slides down your throat, offering a moment of comfort in your congested misery. The efficacy of these remedies is often hard to quantify. A blend of actual physiological effect, placebo, and the profound psychological comfort of being cared for. Grandma's gruel might not have been a cure-all, and some of her rubs might have been more pungent than pleasant, but they were offered with love and a deep-seated belief in their power to heal. And sometimes, when you're feeling wretched, with a cold, that care and conviction are a powerful medicine in themselves. The aroma of camphor and honey fills the air, a familiar scent of domestic doctoring. The comforting, if sometimes eyebrow-raising aromas of Grandma's kitchen begin to recede, and you find yourself focusing more specifically on one particularly irritating symptom of your relentless cold. That persistent, nagging cough. It's the kind that keeps you awake at night, racks your chest, and leaves your throat feeling raw and scraped. While many of the remedies you've encountered so far aim to treat the cold in general, there was a special arsenal reserved for tackling this most tenacious of troublemakers. From ancient times to the not-so-distant past, the quest to soothe irritated throats and silence persistent coughs has led to some surprisingly potent and occasionally risky ingredients. Let's journey back for a moment to those Egyptian physicians you consulted. Remember their reliance on honey? That remains a cornerstone. Honey's demulcent properties, its ability to coat and soothe irritated mucous membranes, made it an ideal base for cough remedies across centuries and cultures. It was often combined with herbs known or believed to have expectorant qualities. That is, they were thought to help loosen phlegm and make coughs more productive. You might encounter licorice root, prized for its sweetness and soothing, anti-inflammatory properties. It was used in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, and its popularity continued through the medieval period and beyond, often appearing in cough syrups and lozenges. The sweetness helped mask less palatable ingredients, a useful trick when trying to administer medicine, especially to children. Horehound, a bitter herb from the mint family, is another persistent player in the historical cough remedy game. Its leaves and flowers were made into teas, candies, or syrups. Pliny the Elder mentioned it, and its use was widespread throughout the Middle Ages and into the 19th century. It was believed to be a powerful expectorant, helping to clear the lungs. Horehound drops, those strangely bittersweet candies, are a lingering echo of this long tradition. Another herb you'd frequently encounter is hyssop, often mentioned in the Bible and valued by figures like Hippocrates. It was typically made into a tea or syrup and was thought to cleanse the lungs and relieve coughs and chest congestion. As you move through the centuries, the basic principles often remained the same: soothe, expectorate. But the ingredients could become more powerful and sometimes more dangerous. The Renaissance and later periods, with their expanding global trade, introduced new botanical options. You might recall cinchona bark, primarily for fevers, but its general use for illness meant it sometimes found its way into complex cough mixtures. More significantly, the Victorian era, with its explosion of patent medicines, saw the widespread inclusion of opiates in cough remedies. Laudanum, a tincture of opium and alcohol, morphine, and even heroin, initially marketed by Bayer in the late 19th century as a non-addictive cough suppressant and morphine substitute, a tragic misjudgment, became common ingredients in over-the-counter cough syrups. These substances were undeniably effective at suppressing the cough reflex. A good dose of an opiate-laced syrup would indeed quieten that hacking cough and allow you to get some rest. The problem, of course, was their highly addictive nature and other dangerous side effects, which were often downplayed or ignored in the aggressive marketing of these products. It's a sobering thought that a simple cough could lead one down a path to opiate dependence. Beyond opiates, other potent substances were employed. Belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, contains atropine, which can dry up secretions and relax smooth muscles in the airways. In small, carefully controlled doses, and carefully controlled is the operative phrase given its toxicity. It was sometimes used in cough preparations to reduce bronchial spasms and mucus production. However, the line between a therapeutic dose and a toxic one was perilously thin. Chloroform was another substance that found its way into some late 19th and early 20th century cough mixtures, prized for its sedative and cough-suppressing effects. Again, effective, but with significant risks. The precise understanding of dosage and long-term effects of these potent substances was often lacking, leading to what historians sometimes refer to as a period of therapeutic exuberance, where the desire to provide relief occasionally outpaced caution. In the realm of domestic and folk remedies, you might encounter some less risky, if still somewhat unusual, approaches. Onion syrup, which you met in colonial kitchens, remained a staple for coughs, the pungent juice mixed with sugar or honey. A poultice of warm figs, applied to the chest, was an old remedy believed to soothe coughs and draw out inflammation. Flaxseed tea, made by simmering flax seeds in water until a mucilaginous liquid formed, was drunk to soothe irritated throats and act as a demulcent. Sometimes, this would be flavored with lemon and honey to make it more palatable. A quirky, lesser-known practice involved inhaling the smoke from burning mullein leaves. Mullein, a tall, fuzzy-leafed plant, has a long history of use as a respiratory remedy, and its dried leaves were sometimes smoked in a pipe or burned as an incense, the smoke believed to soothe coughs and clear congestion. While inhaling smoke isn't generally advisable, the belief in its efficacy persisted for centuries. One mainstream historical fact regarding coughs is the long-standing differentiation between dry coughs and productive or wet coughs. Treatments were often tailored accordingly. For a dry, tickling cough, the emphasis would be on soothing demulcents, like honey or slippery elm, and cough suppressants, if available and deemed appropriate. For a wet, phlegmy cough, the focus would be on expectorants like horehound or seneca root to help expel the mucus. This distinction, based on observable symptoms, shows a degree of nuanced understanding, even if the underlying causes were still misunderstood. As you cough, feeling that familiar rattle in your chest or the irritating tickle in your throat, you can appreciate the centuries of effort that have gone into trying to silence that sound. From gentle herbal infusions to dangerously potent narcotics, the human desire for a peaceful night's sleep, free from the tyranny of a persistent cough, has driven an extraordinary range of innovations and experiments. You might be offered a sweet, sticky syrup, its contents perhaps a closely guarded family secret or a commercially advertised marvel. You take a spoonful, hoping for relief, a quiet moment in the long ongoing dialogue between humanity and its many ailments. The taste might be bitter, or cloyingly sweet, or sharply medicinal, but it carries with it the weight of history, a testament to the enduring struggle to breathe easy. The focus shifts from the specific misery of a cough to another common and often alarming companion to your cold: fever. That sudden wave of heat, the shivering chills that can accompany it, the general feeling of being unwell that intensifies when your body temperature rises. These are sensations that have frightened and perplexed people for millennia. Before, the invention of the thermometer and a scientific understanding of what fever actually is, a complex immune response, not a disease in itself, societies grappled with this fiery symptom using a fascinating, and sometimes frankly chilling, array of flawed fixes and fearful interpretations. Imagine yourself in any of the historical periods we've visited: ancient Egypt, classical Rome, medieval Europe, or even the more recent Victorian era. You feel that telltale heat begin to creep over you. Your skin is flushed, your pulse races, and you might feel a strange combination of lethargy and restlessness. In a world without precise measurement, fever was judged by the touch of a hand to the forehead, by the observed flushing of the skin, or by the patient's subjective feeling of heat and discomfort. It was often seen not merely as a symptom, but as a distinct disease entity in itself, or at least a sign that the body was dangerously out of balance or under attack from some malevolent influence. In the humoral system that dominated Western medicine for so long, fever was typically associated with an excess of hot humors, particularly blood or yellow bile. Therefore, many treatments aimed to cool the body or to expel this supposed excess heat. Bloodletting was a go-to remedy for fevers for centuries. The logic, however flawed, was that by removing a quantity of hot blood, you could reduce the overall heat in the body and restore humoral balance. Leeches were also frequently employed for the same purpose, applied to the temples or other parts of the body to draw out blood in a more localized way. You can imagine the weakness and dizziness that would often follow such treatments, adding to the misery of the fever itself. Purging, too, was a standard approach. Strong emetics to induce vomiting and powerful laxatives to clear the bowels were administered with the aim of expelling the fiery humours responsible for the fever. The idea was to cleanse the body from the inside out. While dehydration is a significant risk with fever, these aggressive purging methods would have only exacerbated the problem, leading to further weakness and electrolyte imbalance. It's a stark reminder that treatments intended to heal could sometimes cause significant harm. The precise reasons why these often debilitating evacuant therapies remained so popular for so long is a subject of ongoing scholarly discussion, likely involving a combination of entrenched medical theory, the dramatic, if not necessarily beneficial, observable effects of the treatments, and a lack of effective alternatives. Cooling measures were, understandably, also employed, though not always in ways we would now consider sensible. Sponging the body with cool water or vinegar water solutions was common and could provide some temporary comfort. However, sometimes more extreme measures were taken. Immersion in cold baths, even for patients already weakened by illness, was practiced by some based on the idea of directly counteracting the body's heat. This could be a shocking and unpleasant experience and potentially dangerous, especially for the very young, the elderly, or the frail. You might also be advised to drink copious amounts of cooling liquids, such as barley water, fruit juices, if available, or water infused with cooling herbs like borage or lemon balm. In many cultures, fever was also associated with supernatural causes, the wrath of gods, the influence of evil spirits, or bewitchment. Therefore, rituals, prayers, and the use of amulets or charms were often considered just as important as physical remedies. You might have a priest or shaman perform a ceremony to drive out the fever demon, or wear a specific talisman believed to have protective or cooling properties. These practices provided psychological comfort and a sense of agency in the face of a frightening and poorly understood symptom. One mainstream historical fact is the devastating impact of fevers associated with infectious diseases like malaria, typhoid, typhus, and smallpox, which were often far more deadly than the fever accompanying a common cold. However, in the absence of clear diagnostic distinctions, any fever could cause significant alarm, as it might be the first sign of a life-threatening illness. This fear undoubtedly fueled the aggressive nature of many historical fever treatments, a desperate attempt to ward off a potentially fatal outcome. A particularly quirky, lesser-known approach to fever management, found in some folk traditions, involved transferring the fever. This might involve tying a red thread around the patient's wrist and then, after a certain period, tying that thread to a tree or an animal, with the belief that the fever would pass into the new host. Another practice involved creating a poultice of certain plants and then, after applying it to the patient, burying it, symbolically burying the fever with it. These sympathetic magic practices highlight the desire to actively expel the illness from the body and the immediate environment. Diet for fever patients was also a subject of much debate. The adage, "feed a cold, starve a fever," or sometimes the reverse, reflects this uncertainty. Generally, light, easily digestible foods were recommended, such as broths, gruels, and jellies. Heavy, rich foods were thought to exacerbate the internal heat. There was also a strong belief in the healing crisis, the idea that the fever itself, or the intense sweating that sometimes accompanied its breaking, was the body's way of expelling the disease. Therefore, some treatments aimed to promote sweating, such as piling on blankets or administering diaphoretic herbs like elderflower or yarrow, even when the patient was already feeling uncomfortably hot. As you lie there, feeling the waves of heat and perhaps the accompanying chills, you are at the mercy of the prevailing medical wisdom of your time. Your forehead might be sponged with rose water, or you might be urged to drink a bitter herbal concoction designed to make you sweat. Perhaps a concerned relative is murmuring prayers in the corner, or a physician is gravely inspecting a sample of your urine for signs of humoral imbalance. The experience of fever, that internal fire, is a primal one, and the historical attempts to quench it, however flawed, speak to a deep-seated human fear of its consuming power and an equally deep desire to restore coolness, balance, and well-being. The intense heat of the feverish state begins to subside in your thoughts, replaced by a different kind of atmosphere, one filled with whispers, arcane symbols, and the subtle scent of unfamiliar incense or smouldering herbs. You're now drifting into the realm where medicine intertwined overtly with the magical and the mystical. For much of human history, the line between a medicinal herb and a magical charm, between a prayer and an incantation, was not just blurry, but often non-existent. When practical remedies failed, or even alongside them, people turned to charms, chants, and a host of superstitious soothers to ward off or alleviate common sicknesses like your persistent cold. Imagine yourself in a small village, perhaps in medieval Europe, or even in a more remote community in later centuries. The local priest or physician might offer their text-based or herb lore advice, but there's also the village cunning man or wise woman, whose knowledge blends herbalism with what we would now call folk magic. If your cold is particularly stubborn, or if you suspect it might have an unnatural origin, perhaps the ill wishes of a neighbor or the touch of a mischievous sprite, you might seek out their help. They wouldn't offer a prescription in the modern sense, but rather a ritual, an amulet, or a specific set of words to be spoken. Amulets were incredibly common. These were objects believed to possess inherent protective or healing powers, worn on the body to ward off illness or draw it out. You might be given a small bag containing specific dried herbs, a curious stone found in a particular location, a piece of parchment with sacred words or symbols written on it, or even something more unusual like a wolf's tooth or a mole's foot. The belief was that these objects acted as a shield against disease-causing entities or negative energies. For a cough, you might wear a string of amber beads or carry a piece of coral, both believed to have protective qualities for the throat and lungs. The materials themselves were thought to have an intrinsic virtue, a sympathetic resonance that could influence your body's health. Historians still explore the deep psychological comfort these objects provided, irrespective of any direct physiological effect. Chants and incantations played a significant role too. These were specific verbal formulas, often passed down through generations, believed to hold power over illness. They might involve invoking saints, angels, or ancient deities, or they might be more direct commands to the sickness to leave the body. Sometimes the words themselves were nonsensical or in a forgotten language, their power thought to reside in their sound and antiquity rather than their literal meaning. You might be instructed to repeat a certain phrase 3 times at sunrise, or to whisper an incantation over a cup of water before drinking it. The act of speaking the words, the focused intention, was part of the cure. One quirky, lesser-known practice involved measuring a sickness. This could involve using a special ribbon or thread to measure a part of the patient's body while reciting specific charms, then disposing of the thread in a particular way, symbolically casting off the ailment. Ritualistic practices were also central to these folk healing traditions. These were often tied to specific times, places, or natural phenomena. For example, to cure a cough, you might be told to go to a crossroads at midnight and leave an offering, or to pass a sick child through a split in a tree, a practice known as passing through. Water from a sacred well, collected under a full moon, might be drunk or used to wash the afflicted part of the body. These rituals provided a structured way to engage with the unseen forces believed to influence health and disease, offering a sense of control and participation in the healing process. The choice of location, like a crossroads, often held symbolic meaning, representing a place of transition where illnesses could be left behind. Astrology also frequently played a part in these health beliefs. The movements of the planets and stars were thought to influence not only human destiny, but also physical health. A skilled astrologer physician might cast your horoscope to determine the best time to administer a remedy, or to understand the cosmic influences contributing to your cold. Certain herbs were associated with specific planets, and their efficacy was believed to be enhanced if they were gathered and prepared under the correct astrological conditions. This added another layer of complexity and mystique to the healing. Arts, not even colors, could hold superstitious significance in relation to illness. You already encountered the red flannel believed to be beneficial for sore throats. Other colors might be considered unlucky, or conversely, to have healing properties for specific conditions. The choice of bed linens, the color of clothing worn by the sick person, or even the color of the medicine itself could be imbued with meaning beyond its practical application. A mainstream historical fact is that these magical and superstitious beliefs were not confined to the uneducated peasantry. People from all levels of society, including the wealthy and the learned, often engaged in such practices or consulted practitioners of folk magic, especially when conventional medicine offered little hope. The official church often condemned overtly magical practices, but many folk beliefs and rituals blended Christian elements with older, pre-Christian traditions, creating a complex, syncretic system of healing. As you sit, perhaps clutching a small, strangely shaped stone given to you by the village wise woman, or carefully reciting a chant you were taught, you are participating in a tradition as old as humanity itself. These practices, born from a desire to understand and influence a world full of unseen dangers, provided comfort, hope, and a framework for dealing with the anxieties of illness. Your cold might be caused by a virus, but in a world where that virus was invisible and unknown, attributing it to a disgruntled nature spirit or the evil eye, and then performing a ritual to appease that spirit or deflect that malevolent gaze, made a certain kind of sense. It was a way of imposing order on chaos, of fighting back with the tools at hand, even if those tools were words, symbols, and the power of belief. The air feels charged with an ancient energy, and you repeat the softly spoken words, hoping they will carry your sniffles and coughs away on the wind. The mystical hum of charms and chants begins to fade, and your attention, still focused on the general discomforts of being unwell, narrows to a specific throbbing torment, the headache. Oh, the common, yet profoundly debilitating headache. Whether it's a dull ache accompanying your cold, a tension headache from the stresses of pre-modern life, or a more severe migraine, this head-splitting affliction has plagued humanity for as long as we've had heads. And just like with colds, the historical attempts to banish the throb have ranged from the sensible to the truly bizarre. We're now expanding our scope slightly, as promised in the and more part of our journey, to peer into the often peculiar medicine cabinet for headache cures. Imagine that familiar pressure starting behind your eyes, or that tight band squeezing around your temples. In ancient times, a severe or persistent headache could be a terrifying symptom. Lacking the understanding of neurology, or even basic physiology that we have today, people often attributed intense head pain to supernatural causes. Perhaps an angry god was striking you, or an evil spirit had taken up residence inside your skull, trying to hammer its way out. The Ebers. Papyrus, that invaluable Egyptian medical text you encountered earlier, contains spells and incantations specifically aimed at banishing headache demons, alongside prescriptions for herbal remedies. One such remedy involved binding a clay crocodile holding herbs in its mouth to the patient's head, with a strip of linen inscribed with magical words. The combination of physical application, herbal properties, and magical ritual was key. In ancient Greece and Rome, headaches were often linked to the humoral theory. An excess of a particular humour, perhaps hot and dry yellow bile, or cold and moist phlegm rising to the head, could be blamed. Therefore, treatments aimed to restore balance. This might involve dietary changes, avoiding certain headache-inducing foods like strong wine or aged cheese, or applying cooling substances to the head, like compresses soaked in rosewater or vinegar. Pliny the Elder suggested remedies like tying a wild celery garland around the head, or, rather more alarmingly, touching the afflicted head with the severed trunk of an elephant. The logic behind the elephant trunk cure is, shall we say, opaque, but it highlights the desperation and willingness to try almost anything. One of the most dramatic and certainly most memorable, historical cures for severe headaches, particularly those thought to be caused by evil spirits or built-up pressure within the skull, was trepanation. This involved drilling, cutting, or scraping a hole into the human skull. Archaeological evidence for trepanation dates back thousands of years across various cultures worldwide. While it sounds horrifying and undoubtedly was incredibly risky, some individuals clearly survived. The procedure, as evidenced by healed bone growth around the trepanned holes. Historians still debate the precise reasons for trepanation, whether it was primarily ritualistic, a desperate attempt to relieve pressure from head injuries or intracranial diseases, or a combination of factors. For a headache, the idea might have been to release the trapped spirit or the bad humors. You can only imagine the sheer terror and agony involved. Moving into the medieval and Renaissance periods, herbal remedies remained a mainstay for headaches. Herbs like chamomile, lavender, rosemary, and feverfew were commonly used, often brewed into teas or applied as poultices. Feverfew, in particular, has a long history of use for headaches and migraines, and modern research has even found some evidence for its efficacy in preventing migraines for some people. Poultices made from mustard, yes, our fiery friend again, or horseradish might be applied to the nape of the neck or the temples, the counter-irritation believed to draw out the pain. Bloodletting, especially from veins in the temples or forehead, was also a common treatment if the headache was thought to be due to an excess of blood. Then there were the more aromatic approaches. Smelling salts, often containing ammonia, or strong herbal essences, were used to revive those faint from pain or to clear a stuffy head. You might also be advised to inhale the smoke of burning herbs or to wear a sachet of fragrant plants around your neck. The idea that strong smells could influence the state of the head was quite prevalent. One quirky, lesser-known practice involved applying slices of raw potato or cucumber to the temples. The coolness and perhaps some unknown property of the vegetable believed to draw out the heat and pain. It's a surprisingly persistent folk remedy. In the Victorian era, with the rise of patent medicines, came a new wave of headache powders and pills. Many of these contained ingredients like acetanilide, phenacetin, or caffeine. Acetanilide and phenacetin were early synthetic analgesics, effective at relieving pain, but later found to have serious side effects, including kidney damage and blood disorders. Caffeine, of course, is still a common ingredient in headache remedies today, known for its ability to constrict blood vessels. Bromides were also used for their sedative effects, particularly for nervous headaches. And, as with cough remedies, opiates sometimes made an appearance in headache cures, offering potent, if risky, relief. A mainstream historical fact is that the understanding and classification of different headache types were rudimentary. Headaches arising from eye strain, sinus infections, tension, migraines, or more serious underlying conditions were often lumped together, making targeted treatment difficult. This lack of differentiation contributed to the somewhat scattergun approach to remedies. As you hold your throbbing head, perhaps in a dimly lit Victorian parlour, you might be offered a miracle headache powder from a brightly coloured tin, or advised to lie down in a darkened room with a lavender-scented compress on your forehead. The quest for relief from this ancient torment was as varied as the perceived causes. From clay crocodiles to trepanning tools, from gentle herbal teas to potent chemical concoctions, humanity has tried an astonishing array of methods to silence the hammering in our heads. You close your eyes, hoping this particular remedy, whether it's a simple cup of rosemary tea or a pinch of a physician's prescribed powder, will finally bring some peace to your aching skull. The world outside continues its relentless pace, but inside your head, the demand for quiet, for an end to the pain, is all-consuming. The throbbing in your temples begins to ease, and your attention drifts downwards, settling in that other common trouble spot, your grumbling gut. From a mild indigestion after a questionable medieval meal, to more distressing episodes of stomach cramps, bloating, or an urgent need for the nearest privy, Digestive distress has been another constant companion throughout human history. So, as we continue our and more exploration, let's journey into the historical medicine cabinet once again, this time for remedies addressing these common and often embarrassing afflictions of the stomach and bowels. The things people ingested or had done to them to soothe a troubled tummy could be as varied and sometimes as unsettling as the cures for colds and headaches. Imagine yourself in ancient Rome, perhaps after overindulging at a lavish banquet. Remember those feasts with dormice and flamingo tongues? Your stomach is protesting loudly. What would you do? The Romans, like the Greeks before them, relied heavily on herbs known for their carminative, gas-relieving, and digestive properties. Fennel, anise, caraway, and dill seeds were commonly chewed or brewed into teas to ease bloating and stomach pains. Peppermint and ginger, still popular today for settling upset stomachs, were also known and used. If the problem was more severe, say a bout of diarrhea, astringent herbs like plantain leaf or blackberry root might be employed to bind the bowels. And of course, if the issue was thought to be an excess of some humour, purging with emetics or laxatives was always an option, a sort of reset button for the digestive system, albeit a rather violent one. One particularly Roman habit, though not strictly a medicine, was the vomitorium. Not a room for vomiting as popularly imagined, but rather an exit passage in amphitheatres. However, induced vomiting after overeating was certainly a practice, among some of the elite, seen as a way to make room for more feasting rather than a medical treatment per se. Moving into the medieval period, the humoral theory still dictated much of the approach to digestive woes. An upset stomach might be blamed on an imbalance of cold, moist phlegm, or perhaps fiery yellow bile. Warming spices like ginger, cloves, and cinnamon were frequently used in food and drink, not just for flavor, but for their perceived digestive benefits, helping to counteract coldness in the stomach. For constipation, common then as now, remedies included stewed fruits like prunes and figs, or more robust laxatives like senna or rhubarb root, which could produce quite dramatic effects. Historians still discuss the typical medieval diet, which, for many, especially the poor, could be quite coarse and abrasive. Remember that gritty bread? Potentially contributing to digestive issues, though it was also often high in fibre from whole grains and vegetables when available. If you suffered from windy colic, sharp abdominal pains likely due to gas, you might be given a drink, infused with chamomile, renowned for its calming and antispasmodic properties. Or perhaps a poultice of warm herbs would be applied to your abdomen. For more persistent or severe stomach ailments, the lines between physical and spiritual remedies often blurred. Prayers to Saint Erasmus, also known as Saint Elmo, the patron saint of abdominal pain, might be offered, or specific charms recited. The Renaissance saw the introduction of new ingredients, but many of ancient and medieval stomach remedies persisted. Distilled herbal waters, or cordials, became increasingly popular. These were often alcoholic infusions of various herbs and spices, believed to aid digestion, warm the stomach, and lift the spirits. Aqua vitae, water of life, a strong alcoholic, spirit, sometimes flavored with herbs, was considered a powerful digestive aid and general tonic. You might sip a small glass after a heavy meal to help things along. One quirky, lesser-known practice from this era involved using stomach stones, or bezoars, hardened, undigested masses found in the stomachs of animals, particularly goats. These were highly prized and incredibly expensive, believed to be powerful antidotes to poison and effective remedies for various internal ailments, including stomach complaints. They would be dipped into a drink or ground into a powder. Across the Atlantic, in colonial America, settlers adapted Old World remedies and incorporated New World botanicals. Ginger again was a favorite, often candied or made into a tea. For an upset stomach or diarrhea, teas made from blackberry root or raspberry leaves were common. From Native American traditions, colonists learned about the uses of plants like golden seal for digestive inflammation, or ipecac, in very small, carefully controlled doses, as it's a powerful emetic, for certain types of dysentery. The domestic, Medicine chests would be well stocked with various bitters and carminatives. Stomach bitters, proprietary blends of bitter herbs infused in alcohol, became popular in the 18th and 19th centuries, taken before meals to stimulate appetite and aid digestion, or after meals to settle the stomach. The Victorian era brought its own array of digestive aids and remedies for stomach complaints, many of them heavily advertised patent medicines. Bicarbonate of soda for sour stomach or heartburn became widely available and used. Charcoal biscuits were eaten to absorb gas and toxins. One of the most dramatic and certainly most memorable historical cures for severe headaches, particularly those thought to be caused by evil spirits or built-up pressure within the skull, was trepanation. This involved drilling, cutting, or scraping a hole into the human skull. Archaeological evidence for trepanation dates back thousands of years, across various cultures worldwide. While it sounds horrifying, and undoubtedly was incredibly risky, some individuals clearly survived. The procedure, as evidenced by healed bone growth around the trepanned holes. Historians still debate the precise reasons for trepanation, whether it was primarily ritualistic, a desperate attempt to relieve pressure from head injuries or intracranial diseases, or a combination of factors. For a headache, the idea might have been to release the trapped spirit or the bad humors. You can only imagine the sheer terror and agony involved. Moving into the medieval and Renaissance periods, herbal remedies remained a mainstay for headaches. Herbs like chamomile, lavender, rosemary, and feverfew were commonly used, often brewed into teas or applied as poultices. Feverfew, in particular, has a long history of use for headaches and migraines, and modern research has even found some evidence for its efficacy in preventing migraines for some people. Poultices made from mustard, yes, our fiery friend again, or horseradish might be applied to the nape of the neck or the temples, the counter-irritation believed to draw out the pain. Bloodletting, especially from veins in the temples or forehead, was also a common treatment if the headache was thought to be due to an excess of blood. Then there were the more aromatic approaches. Smelling salts, often containing ammonia, or strong herbal essences, were used to revive those faint from pain, or to clear a stuffy head. You might also be advised to inhale the smoke of burning herbs, or to wear a sachet of fragrant plants around your neck. The idea that strong smells could influence the state of the head was quite prevalent. One quirky, lesser-known practice involved applying slices of raw potato or cucumber to the temples. The coolness and perhaps some unknown property of the vegetable believed to draw out the heat and pain. It's a surprisingly persistent folk remedy. In the Victorian era, with the rise of patent medicines, came a new wave of headache powders and pills. Many of these contained ingredients like acetanilide, phenacetin, or caffeine. Acetanilide and phenacetin were early synthetic analgesics, effective at relieving pain, but later found to have serious side effects, including kidney damage and blood disorders. Caffeine, of course, is still a common ingredient in headache remedies today, known for its ability to constrict blood vessels. Bromides were also used for their sedative effects, particularly for nervous headaches. And as with cough remedies, opiates sometimes made an appearance in headache cures, offering potent, if risky, relief. A mainstream historical fact is that the understanding and classification of different headache types were rudimentary. Headaches arising from eye strain, sinus infections, tension, migraines, or more serious underlying conditions were often lumped together, making targeted treatment difficult. This lack of differentiation contributed to the somewhat scattergun approach to remedies. As you hold your throbbing head, perhaps in a dimly lit Victorian parlour, you might be offered a miracle headache powder from a brightly coloured tin, or advised to lie down in a darkened room with a lavender-scented compress on your forehead. The quest for relief from this ancient torment was as varied as the perceived causes. From clay crocodiles to trepanning tools, from gentle herbal teas to potent chemical concoctions, humanity has tried an astonishing array of methods to silence the hammering in our heads. You close your eyes, hoping this particular remedy, whether It's a simple cup of rosemary tea or a pinch of a physician's prescribed powder will finally bring some peace to your aching skull. The world outside continues its relentless pace, but inside your head, the demand for quiet, for an end to the pain, is all-consuming. The throbbing in your temples begins to ease, and your attention drifts downwards, settling in that other common trouble spot, your grumbling gut. From a mild indigestion after a questionable medieval meal to more distressing episodes of stomach cramps, bloating, or an urgent need for the nearest privy, digestive distress has been another constant companion throughout human history. So, as we continue our and more exploration, let's journey into the historical medicine cabinet once again, this time for remedies addressing these common and often embarrassing afflictions of the stomach and bowels. The things people ingested or had done to them to soothe a troubled tummy could be as varied and sometimes as unsettling as the cures for colds and headaches. Imagine yourself in ancient Rome, perhaps after overindulging at a lavish banquet. Remember those feasts with dormice and flamingo tongues? Your stomach is protesting loudly. What would you do? The Romans, like the Greeks before them, relied heavily on herbs known for their carminative, gas-relieving, and digestive properties. Fennel, anise, caraway, and dill seeds were commonly chewed or brewed into teas to ease bloating and stomach pains. Peppermint and ginger, still popular today for settling upset stomachs, were also known and used. If the problem was more severe, say a bout of diarrhea, astringent herbs like plantain leaf or blackberry root might be employed to bind the bowels. And of course, if the issue was thought to be an excess of some humour, purging with emetics or laxatives was always an option, a sort of reset button for the digestive system, albeit a rather violent one. One particularly Roman habit, though not strictly a medicine, was the vomitorium, not a room for vomiting as popularly imagined, but rather an exit passage in amphitheatres. However, induced vomiting after overeating was certainly a practice, among some of the elite, seen as a way to make room for more feasting, rather than a medical treatment per se. Moving into the medieval period, the humoral theory still dictated much of the approach to digestive woes. An upset stomach might be blamed on an imbalance of cold, moist phlegm, or perhaps fiery yellow bile. Warming spices like ginger, cloves, and cinnamon were frequently used in food and drink, not just for flavor, but for their perceived digestive benefits, helping to counteract coldness in the stomach. For constipation, common then as now, remedies included stewed fruits like prunes and figs, or more robust laxatives like senna or rhubarb root, which could produce quite dramatic effects. Historians still discuss the typical medieval diet, which, for many, especially the poor, could be quite coarse and abrasive. Remember that gritty bread? Potentially contributing to digestive issues, though it was also often high in fiber from whole grains and vegetables when available. If you suffered from wandy colic, sharp abdominal pains likely due to gas, you might be given a drink, infused with chamomile, renowned for its calming and antispasmodic properties, or perhaps a poultice of warm herbs would be applied to your abdomen. For more persistent or severe stomach ailments, the lines between physical and spiritual remedies often blurred. Prayers to Saint Erasmus, also known as Saint Elmo, the patron saint of abdominal pain, might be offered, or specific charms recited. The Renaissance saw the introduction of new ingredients, but many of ancient and medieval stomach remedies persisted. Distilled herbal waters, or cordials, became increasingly popular. These were often alcoholic infusions of various herbs and spices, believed to aid digestion, warm the stomach, and lift the spirits. Aqua vitae, water of life, a strong alcoholic. Spirit, sometimes flavored with herbs, was considered a powerful digestive aid and general tonic. You might sip a small glass after a heavy meal to help things along. One quirky, lesser-known practice from this era involved using stomach stones, or bezoars, hardened, undigested masses found in the stomachs of animals, particularly goats. These were highly prized and incredibly expensive, believed to be powerful antidotes to poison and effective remedies for various internal ailments, including stomach complaints. They would be dipped into a drink or ground into a powder. Across the Atlantic, in colonial America, settlers adapted Old World remedies and incorporated New World botanicals. Ginger, again, was a favorite, often candied or made into a tea. For an upset stomach or diarrhea, teas made from blackberry root or raspberry leaves were common. From Native American traditions, colonists learned about the uses of plants like golden seal for digestive inflammation or ipecac in very small, carefully controlled doses, as it's a powerful emetic for certain types of dysentery. The domestic medicine chest would be well stocked with various bitters and carminatives. Stomach bitters, proprietary blends of bitter herbs infused in alcohol, became popular in the 18th and 19th centuries, taken before meals to stimulate appetite and aid digestion, or after meals to settle the stomach. The Victorian era brought its own array of digestive aids and remedies for stomach complaints, many of them heavily advertised patent medicines. Bicarbonate of soda, for sour stomach or heartburn, became widely available and used. Charcoal biscuits were eaten to absorb gas and toxins. Think of the sheer persistence of it all. The same basic complaints, the runny nose, the sore throat, the aching head, echoing down through millennia. And for each complaint, 1,000 different answers, 1,000 different remedies offered, with varying degrees of confidence and efficacy. You've tasted the honeyed concoctions of Egypt, felt the fiery embrace of a medieval mustard plaster, considered the exotic promise of New World botanicals, and perhaps even cautiously eyed a Victorian patent medicine bottle with its dubious yet alluring claims. You've seen how the understanding of the body itself shifted from a vessel of balanced humours to a battleground for invading microbes. What's truly fascinating is not just the strangeness of some of these cures, the onion socks, the snail, broth, the trepan skulls, but the underlying human impulse they represent, the drive to do something, to alleviate suffering, to restore health, even when the tools and knowledge were severely limited. There's a certain creativity, a relentless trial and error, evident in the historical pharmacopoeia. If one herb didn't work, try another. If a poultice failed, perhaps a chant or an amulet would do the trick. The placebo effect, undoubtedly, played a significant role. If you truly believed that wearing a specific charm or drinking a particular brew would make you well, sometimes that belief itself could contribute to a sense of improvement, easing anxiety, and perhaps even subtly influencing physiological processes. The power of hope and the comfort of care are not to be underestimated, even when the medicine itself was inert or based on flawed premises. Consider the blend of the practical and the magical that you've witnessed. The same person who might meticulously prepare a herbal infusion based on generations of observed, if not always correctly interpreted effects, might also whisper a charm over it for good measure. The lines we draw today between science, superstition, and faith were far more permeable in the past. Illness was often seen as an intrusion, whether of bad air, an imbalanced humor, or a malevolent spirit, and the defenses against it were equally varied, drawing from all aspects of human experience and belief. Historians often emphasize that we should avoid presentism, judging the past by today's standards. When looking at these historical medical practices, they were logical within their own frameworks of understanding the world. You can also appreciate the immense sensory tapestry of these historical remedies. The sharp, pungent aroma of mustard and vinegar, the sweet, cloying taste of honeyed syrups, sometimes masking bitter herbs, the rough texture of a flannel poultice, the smoky scent of burning leaves or incense used for fumigation, the eerie silence of a sick room punctuated only by coughs and whispered prayers. These sensory details bring the past to life, reminding you that these were real people, feeling real discomfort, seeking real relief with the means available to them. And now, as you sit here, perhaps with a modern, effective cold and flu medication conveniently at hand, or simply with the knowledge that a few days of rest and fluids will likely see you through, you can feel a sense of gratitude for the journey. Gratitude for the scientific advancements that have unraveled so many of the mysteries of disease, that have given us tools to diagnose, treat, and prevent illnesses in ways our ancestors could only dream of. The path from trepanation for a headache to targeted analgesics or from humoral bloodletting for a fever, to understanding the immune response has been long and often arduous. The quirky, lesser-known tidbits you've encountered, the hair in the oak tree, the live spiders for a cough, the elephant trunk for a headache, serve not just as amusing anecdotes, but as reminders of the boundless human capacity for belief and the often thin veil between what is considered rational and what is deemed absurd, depending on the cultural and historical context. They highlight the desperation that illness can induce, pushing people to try almost anything in search of a cure. Ultimately, this journey through Remedies' past is a profoundly human story. It's about our vulnerability to illness, our resilience in the face of it, our enduring curiosity, and our relentless pursuit of well-being. The eternal sniffle may still be with us, a testament to the adaptability of viruses, but our understanding of it and our ability to manage its symptoms has been transformed. We no longer blame imbalanced humours or mischievous sprites for our coughs and sneezes. Instead, we look to science, to evidence, and to the cumulative knowledge passed down not just through folklore, but through rigorous investigation and discovery. As you reflect on this long history, from ancient whispers and wheezes to the dawning of scientific doubt, you're left with a sense of connection to all those who came before, who huddled by their fires, sipped their herbal brews, and hoped for a swift recovery. Just as you do when that familiar tickle starts in your own throat. The remedies may have changed, but the fundamental human experience of being unwell and the deep-seated desire to feel better remains a constant, timeless thread. The story of how we've dealt with common ailments is, in many ways, the story of becoming modern, of slowly peeling back the layers of mystery surrounding our own bodies and the world we inhabit. It's a tale filled with good intentions, fascinating missteps, and the quiet, persistent march of knowledge. And so, we find ourselves at a point of peaceful reflection, looking back at the winding, often peculiar path of healing, the myriad ways people have sought comfort, the strange ingredients they've employed, the theories they've constructed, all speak to a fundamental human need. Tonight, as you settle into your own rest, perhaps you can appreciate the simple comfort of a warm bed, the ready availability of clean water, and the knowledge that if a cold does strike, you won't be prescribed a poultice of questionable origin or advised to wear onions in your socks, unless of course you choose to. The history of these remedies, in all its charming strangeness and earnest effort, offers a gentle reminder of how far we've come, and a soft cushion upon which to rest our modern heads. May your own path to feeling better, should you need it, be far simpler and more soothing than many we have explored tonight. The night is quiet now, and the long history of human endeavour, in sickness and in health, fades into a peaceful stillness. Sleep now, and let the remedies of the past remain in the gentle quiet of history. The air around you seems to grow even softer now, the stories of past remedies and ancient aches beginning to dissolve like mist in the early morning light. You can almost hear the distant echo of a medieval chant fading, the faint scent of Victorian eucalyptus vapour dissipating into the quiet of your room. These journeys into the past, with all their peculiar twists and earnest endeavours, are now settling gently, like dust motes in a still ray of moonlight. Allow your mind to drift away from the thought of pungent poultices and questionable gruels. Let go of the images of ancient physicians and their solemn pronouncements. Instead, feel the simple comfort of your own bed, the gentle weight of your blanket, the steady rhythm of your own quiet breath. The world outside, with all its complexities and concerns, can wait. Here, in this peaceful space, there is only rest. The long, winding road of human history, with its countless attempts to understand and to heal, has brought us to this present moment of relative comfort and knowledge. Be thankful for the quiet, ease that modern understanding brings, even for something as simple as a common cold. There is no need now to consult the stars or to seek out a charm of knotted thread. There is only the need for rest, for your body to do its own quiet work of mending and restoring. Imagine all those historical figures, from the anonymous cave dweller with the first sniffle, to the learned Victorian scholar pondering germ theory, all eventually seeking the same solace you are seeking now: a peaceful, restorative sleep. Let their stories become a soft, murmuring background to your own descent into slumber. The challenges they faced, the remedies they tried, all fade into the vast tapestry of time, leaving only a sense of gentle continuity, a shared human experience of seeking comfort and peace. Your breathing deepens, your muscles soften, and any lingering thoughts of historical ailments begin to feel distant and unimportant. The only thing that matters now is the profound stillness of the night, the gentle pull of sleep, and the promise of waking refreshed. Let the quietude envelop you, like the softest, most comforting blanket. Rest now. Drift away on the gentle tide of tiredness. Sweet dreams.